Welcome. Thanks for coming. I'm Preston Troutman with the Canyon City Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs, and I'd like to thank the candidates for coming down this evening and spending some time with us. We really appreciate it. So this evening we're going to start with the candidates for the Congressional District, Mr. Lamborn and Mr. Fawcett, and after that we'll take a break. So they'll be up for about 45 minutes, opening remarks, and then questions and then ending remarks. And then we'll go ahead to the state district's candidates. And this evening our moderator will be Dennis Bloomquist of KRLN Radio, so we'll turn it right over to him.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, George Turner of the Chamber of Commerce, who have presented this. Also, thank you to the City of Canyon City for providing this venue. And we'll go ahead and jump right in with our two candidates. This is I should welcome the audience too. Thank you all for coming out. Welcome to the State and Federal Candidates Forum for the 2006 general election. Our participants tonight, and we'll just name the first two to start with, in District 5 for the U.S. Congress, Jay Fawcett, Democrat, and Doug Lamborn, Republican. And I will name the other candidates. We'll take a 10-minute hiatus after this, and then we'll be back with the remaining candidates. If you have questions, it looks like we have questions. If we have questions, mark them on these cards, give them to George Turner. He'll bring them up, and we'll roll from there. Our format tonight calls for each candidate in this race to make a 5-minute introductory remarks about your personal and professional qualifications, and then we will gather the questions from the crowd. I have some questions that I have prepared, and we'll go from there. Why don't we go ahead and start with the 5-minute introductory comments, and since Mr. Fawcett's on our left, why don't you go ahead and begin?
Well, I'm not sure if it's the left or the right,
our left,
but I'll do the best I can. If you say so. Good evening. Thank you for hosting us this evening. This is where we started our first forum in this race so many months ago, although it doesn't seem like too long at all. In fact, I told my wife what a great job you did. I convinced her to come with me this evening. She's here with us, as is a great campaign staff and my son. So they have great expectations of what a good setup you have here and what a great forum you run. This evening I'd like to share with you a little learning about 21st century campaigning. This is a press release that my opponent sent out today. And it's very interesting because it talks about the Daily Kos site and the blogosphere. It's very interesting because it doesn't get much right. There's an issue here of given contributions by a fellow named Marcos from Daily Kos. I have accepted no contributions from Marcos of Daily Kos. However, online at actblue.com, which I encourage you all to go to, any of you can contribute to my campaign. In fact, 1,506 people have to date this evening for a total of $27,000. My opponent asked me if I'm going to give that money back. I said, no, the postage is just too much alone. But those contributions are from 1,506 American citizens, not from Marcos. Although, let me tell you a little bit about Marcos. This fellow is an immigrant. He came to the country legally, served in the United States Army, used his GI Bill to go to college, and then on to law school, and he set up his own business. Happens to be a website, a blog. And the blogosphere is very interesting. It's 21st century politicking. It's a commons where people can get together and discuss issues. So that's where the money came from folks contributing online, folks just like y'all, because at Act Blue, it doesn't ask you if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. It just asks you if you want to contribute and support a race. And now let's get to the second part of this thing, and here's where I'm going to educate my opponent here a little bit about the military, because I don't think he quite understands what mercenaries are. He took issue with a statement made by Mr. Marcos about some mercenaries that were killed in Iraq. And let me read you the whole context of that comment. Let the people see what war is like. This isn't an Xbox game. That said, I feel nothing over the deaths of mercenaries. They aren't in Iraq because of orders or because they're there trying to help the people make Iraq a better place. They're there to wage war for profit. Screw them. Now, what's interesting is that a conservative blogger who goes by the handle of Tacitus then chimed in and agreed. Let me explain to you that these folks were working for a corporation, and I'm not even sure they were American citizens, but they were working for an American company for $1,000 a day. They were killed. And that's unfortunate. I think any time we see loss in war, it is unfortunate. That is the sadness of war. But it's also important to put comments in context. This is what happens when you attempt to outsource war. This is why you don't outsource war. These were contractors put in harm's way. They were not soldiers. Those are the things that you have to be aware of when you go to the United States Congress. You have to be aware of what your responsibilities are under the checks and balances of the Constitution. You have to understand that to question the president is neither treasonous nor disloyal. I spent 20 years defending the Constitution. I put my life where my mouth is, and I read that document. The Congress has a responsibility they have not been living up to lately. That cannot stand. Because when this war is over, and it will end, we want to ensure that the Constitution that we cherish, that defines who we are, is still intact and in place, just as it has been after every other war. So with that in mind, I look forward to the rest of this evening and your questions, because it was a great chance and a great opportunity to start here for this campaign with so many of you that I see here again this evening. And I hope you'll vote for me in November.
I would love to allow everyone to applaud after every answer or comment that they agree with, but that will limit the time that our candidates actually have to inform us on the important matters at hand here. So let's go ahead and refrain, and we can use all of that energy up at the end of our comments. Mr. Lamborn?
Thank you. I'm State Senator Doug Lamborn. I'm running for the 5th Congressional District for Congress. I'll never raise your taxes. I want to thank the City Council for opening up their chambers here today. I want to thank CCTV for broadcasting this, and I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for sponsoring this event. I'm going to talk about 3 things in my short opening statement: a little bit about me personally, a little bit about how my opponent and I differ, and what I will do if I'm elected as your congressman. On a personal note, my wife Jeannie and I have been married for 30 years this last May. We have 5 great kids, 1 still at home. They've done many great achievements. One of the ones I'm most proud of is my oldest son, who went into the Army 6 days after he graduated from high school, served for 3 years. I like to climb 14ers. I'm comfortable in a town that has a lot of prisons. I grew up in a farm near Leavenworth, Kansas, 4 prisons there, and my father worked at the federal penitentiary. But more to the point, and why you're here to listen to us tonight, how we differ. One example is Referendum C last fall, the biggest tax increase in Colorado history, $5 billion. My opponent supported that. I was against it. And a few years ago, I was the Senate sponsor of the biggest tax cut in Colorado history. $1 billion that saved you just over the first 5 years. If you're at all concerned about the Second Amendment, the NRA has given me an A rating in this race. They've given my opponent a D rating. On illegal immigration, I'm against amnesty. My opponent supports amnesty. I think that sends a bad message to those who have waited in line and gone through the proper channels legally. To let people go in front of them is not the right thing to do. On social issues, I'm pro-life. My opponent is pro-abortion rights. I'm for preserving marriage as a union between one man and one woman and protecting that in our state and federal constitutions. And my opponent does not agree with that. I think the biggest difference is our connection to the 5th Congressional District. My wife and I, next summer, will have been here 20 years. We moved here with our 4 kids in 1987, and we had one after we had moved here. We've been involved in the life of the community for almost 20 years. What I will do as your congressman is basically, folks, I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican. I believe in a strong national defense, in smaller government and lower taxes. And I've been doing that for 12 years in the Colorado House and Senate. I've never supported a tax increase, and I never will. I've supported the veterans and the military. I was chairman of the Senate State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, or was on the committee for a total of 8 years. Some of the things I worked on that committee, I was a Senate sponsor of the bill that increased the pension exclusion. That's meant millions of dollars left in the pockets of our veterans statewide since that bill was passed. I did a bipartisan bill a year ago to help prevent encroachment upon major military installations like Fort Carson. By the way, Fort Carson is the second largest employer in the state of Colorado, next to the state of Colorado itself. This did not pass, but I attempted several times to eliminate the state income tax for active duty military. 10 states do that, and I think Colorado should join those states. To summarize, I support the military. I will fight the war on terror should you send me to Congress. I will do my best to cut taxes and spending. I will work to secure our borders. I will stand for traditional values. I value your vote, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
First question, and we will start with Mr. Lamborn. The Iraq War up until today has cost taxpayers $332 billion with a B. How can you balance the budget with the war in Iraq that is costing American taxpayers $250 million per year? And then we'll let Mr. Fawcett address that when you're done.
The war in Iraq is the central front on the war on terror. We really don't have any choice. We have to fight that war. Osama bin Laden and the terrorists, they know that that is the central front in the war on terror. That's why they're all there fighting the U.S. with tooth and nail. If we don't bring a stable democracy to Iraq, if we were to pull out, if we were to cut and run, that would send a horrible message to our terrorists, to the terrorists who are out, or to our enemies, the terrorists. They would know that America doesn't have the resolve and the backbone that it takes to do something that's difficult, that's hard. I just think that it's so critical, whatever the cost, that we fight the war on terror. We don't have a choice. And folks, remember, they came and attacked us on 9/11 before we even dreamed of going to Iraq. They hate us for who we are, not for what we do. And they did that before we even went to Iraq. And if we leave, it's not going to change. They're going to come after us anyway.
But that doesn't address the question, how do you intend to balance the budget, which was running at a surplus before Bush came into office, now is running at a substantial deficit? How will you reconcile those two issues?
There's a lot of things in the federal budget that we could spend. One thing right off the bat is we can save money on the earmarks. That's tens of billions of dollars a year. That's not the whole solution. I'll just give that as one quick example. There's some long-range things we can do to, for instance, on Social Security, we could reduce our future tremendous obligation for Social Security by allowing, we didn't even discuss it, but to allow for private accounts for young people entering the workforce that want to have some control over their destiny, have some ownership of, and have a nest egg for their retirement instead of the way it is right now. So for the young people who voluntarily want to have a private account, I think we should allow that option, and we should at least discuss that. That could result in many, many billions of dollars saved over the long run.
Mr. Fawcett?
Well, let me start with a soldier's perspective on Iraq. I've actually been in the western desert of Iraq with a rucksack and a rifle. And yeah, those folks don't much care for us, and I don't much care for them either. You don't issue democracy to a country. It doesn't work. Never has, and I don't think it ever will. Something my opponent needs to understand about terrorism. Terrorists need two things: an ideology and resources. They don't need a country. They don't need a place. None of the people that attacked us on 9/11 were Iraqis. In fact, if you want to attack a country over that, Saudi Arabia springs to mind. Now, when we look at the cost of this war and what we're getting out of it, we need to end it, because I agree with the president. We are in a global war on terrorism. But you don't win a global war on terrorism by attacking every country where somebody's bad. If that's the case, we got a long road ahead of us. You deal with terrorism by tracking down the terrorists and killing them. You track them down and you kill them. You do that with law enforcement, you do it with soldiers. You don't do it by invading countries and squandering blood and resources. And let me tell you why I say that. I went through paratrooper training years ago with the British. They spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland wrestling with terrorism. And they'll tell you that boots in the dirt doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't know what's going on and what your enemy's doing. We need to get out of Iraq. I have a plan for doing that, but you know the bottom line is it doesn't matter what my plan is. The president needs to explain to this country why we're in Iraq. He has not done that yet. I've gone and looked at his speeches. I've gone through them. And I've compared him to his dad. My last job in the Air Force was teaching doctrine, policy, and training people to go to war. You want to know why there's so many generals disgruntled right now? It's because they understand that the civilian leadership is supposed to define clear goals and objectives. Well, I've gone on a while. But that's how we're going to have to address this incredible disparity in our economy. And I love the cut and run thing, don't you? Cut and run. Cut and run. We cut and run out of Afghanistan. We didn't get Osama bin Laden. Did we cut and run there? We didn't get Osama bin Laden, and we used the forces that we should have been using to track him down and kill him for an invasion into Iraq. We took our eye off the ball, we missed the focus. And now we're still dealing with Iraq, and we're still dealing with Afghanistan, and we still don't have Osama bin Laden. That's how we're going to have to deal with this huge deficit, is to reassess how our foreign policy, how our military policy, how it costs us so much money, and what goals we're achieving with the money we're spending.
This is a hugely divisive issue, so let's stay with it. What is your plan, and please be specific here, for winning in Iraq and getting our troops home? President Bush has said we'll be there for the duration of his term, which is 2 more years. What is your plan? Mr. Lamborn, we'll start with you.
Well, we started with me last time. Can't you start with Mr. Fawcett this time?
Absolutely. Mr. Fawcett, we'll start with you.
Not a problem. My plan's on my website. Pretty straightforward. Move the American troops immediately to the borders and secure the battle space. That's your military word for the evening, battle space. Lock down the borders, take the Iraqi army with us, train them away from the urban areas. At the same time that we do that, we need to remember that we have more than one tool as the world's best country and the best superpower, the only remaining superpower. We have military power. But you know what my instructors at the academy used to tell us? Be careful when you think your only tool is a hammer, because every problem starts looking like a nail. We have diplomatic power. We have economic power. We have the ability to point out to the other countries in this region that it is not in their interest to allow the civil war that's already started to continue to spiral out of control. Now, if we involve the rest of those countries and find a solution that is in their interest, it is the best long-term shot we're going to have at a solution to this war. Because if we continue to attempt to impose our vision of what Iraq should look like, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what the Iraqis think, or the Kurds, or the Shias, or the Sunnis. And then the choice becomes, do we leave tomorrow, or do we leave in 50 years? Somebody the other day told me that President Bush has been very clear on all the goals and objectives, and then he started listing them all. And I said, yeah, I read his speeches. That's true. He's listed all those things. And the last time we did that was in a place called South Korea. We're still there. Now, if that's what the president wants to do, fine. Let's have that debate. Let's have that discussion about how long we stay and what we want the place to look like when we leave. I don't want to be there for 50 years.
Mr. Lamborn?
A couple things I want to correct you on that you said just a minute ago. We haven't cut and run in Afghanistan. We're still over there, and we're still over there with a number of countries. And yeah, it'd be great to get Osama bin Laden. It'd be great to send a Tomahawk missile into the cave he's staying in right now. But if you imply that state-sponsored terrorism is somehow not worse than these terrorists running around in caves, state-sponsored terrorism is the worst of all because they have the facilities, they have the money, they have the power to do weapons of mass destruction, more than terrorists that are hiding out in caves. So a state that is supporting terrorism and allowing safe haven for terrorists, Afghanistan or Iraq, we can't allow that to happen. So, and by the way, even if you disagree with why we went to Iraq, we have to see it out now. I hope the cut and run philosophy that some of the House Democrats, including John Murtha, would advocate is not the right approach. And the specific approach that you've mentioned, I'm not sure it's practical. If we abandon the urban areas to rebellion and further sectarian strife, that's not going to help anything. If we had been withdrawn to the borders, we would have never gotten Zarqawi. He was the worst guy in the country, and we did get him. We need to train the Iraqis to take over the country, have a stable democracy, and then we can bring our young kids home.
Question is for Mr. Lamborn. Why did you vote to cut VA budget and not cut pork barrel spending? As a result of cutting the VA budget, veterans are going without much needed medical services. First of all, is it true, and why if it is?
Well, I don't know who asked that question, but they're very misinformed. The VA is run by the federal government, and I've been in the state government, so I've had nothing to do with the Veterans Administration. My mother worked at a VA hospital while she was younger and alive. I think we should support our veterans. I don't understand the question. Whoever asked that needs to get their facts straight.
Well, as long as we're on the subject, what would you do if elected to federal office?
I don't understand. Well, could you repeat that? I don't understand your question.
What is your philosophy toward the VA if you're elected to federal office, and what will you do to take care of all of these veterans that we are creating, and including military combat veterans that we are now creating?
I support the veterans. My son's a veteran. My father's a veteran. My mother worked at a VA hospital. For 12 years in the state Senate, I've worked hard for the for veterans and for National Guard or Reserve. For instance, I mentioned earlier the pension exclusion. That was my bill. That put money in the pockets of veterans, an exemption, a greater exemption from the state income tax. We do need to support the veterans. We made a promise to them, and when they're injured or when they're ill, we have to take care of them. So someone needs to get their facts straight on that question.
Now, that's very interesting because my opponent has pledged to follow the President of the United States no matter what and to vote lockstep with his party. And he's made a number of other pledges, including the one you heard tonight about not raising taxes. This president has submitted budgets for the last 2 years that have underfunded the Veterans Administration by over $1 billion in each year. He's been sitting on a program for reallocating resources to build veterans' facilities and refurbish some for 3 years, and it's his own study. So I guess I would ask him if he's going to break ranks with the president on this one and his own party. And while we're at it, just a couple more things since he was correcting me. I didn't come out in support of amnesty. I don't believe in outsourcing war. And as far as the military bases in this district go, I've served, trained, or worked at all 5 of them. So when I talk about what you do with military policy, I'm not willing to fight to the last drop of somebody else's blood. I know what it's like to be in the uniform and be out there. And that's the kind of thing that you need in Congress to be able to do at the federal level, to be able to discuss reasonably how you can move troops around. And yeah, I understand we're still in Afghanistan with NATO, but the point is we shifted over 40% of the American resources, followed by another 20% out of Afghanistan before the mission was complete, and moved it into Iraq.
Could I have a quick response?
One quick rebuttal.
I do support President Bush by and large, but when he is wrong, in my opinion, I'll vote otherwise. He's proposed some things I haven't agreed with. There were some things about the No Child Left Behind Act I didn't agree with. agricultural subsidies, tariffs, I haven't agreed with. His position on amnesty for illegal immigrants, I haven't agreed with that. So when he's wrong, in my opinion, I won't agree with him.
Okay, that segues into the next question.
Well, now, wait a minute. I get a rebuttal to the rebuttal. 2 for 2 here.
Here, why don't you do a rebuttal?
I think that's fair enough. A rebuttal to the rebuttal. What's it going to be? Are you going to, now, let me ask my opponent here, and he can certainly answer this question before we move on. Are you going to support the continued outsourcing of combat operations and warfare, and do you support the American use of mercenaries in combat zones?
If you choose to answer that, you may, Mr. Lamborn.
I highly object to the word mercenary. Mercenary says you're out for the highest, you're for sale to the highest bidder.
Yes, sir, that was in your press release
Excuse me,
today.
sir, why don't you keep your mouth shut?
Audience, please refrain from participating in the debate here.
Actually, that was in your press release today, Mr. Lamborn. The people that were involved were mercenaries, and that's why I'm asking. They were working for private corporations, specifically 4 members of the Black Hawk Corporation. So you brought this up in your press release.
Americans' bodies were dragged to the streets of Fallujah. To call them now mercenaries
They were.
is mocking
They
their
were making
death.
$1,000 a day working for an American corporation called Black Hawk Corporation. You said it's people who go to the highest bidder for the highest dollar. That's what they were. Do you support that continued policy?
Mercenaries would go for any country. These were loyal Americans. Some
Were
of them
they?
are retired military. Some of them are veterans. They were killed by the Muslims. Their bodies were dragged through the streets.
Do you support
You
using
shouldn't-
mercenaries
you
in a
shouldn't take
combat
money.
zone?
Time out. I think we've exhausted this subject. You obviously disagree on it, but we will jump to a related loyalty to President Bush question. Mr. Lamborn, you have promised to stand unyieldingly by President Bush and Republican leaders amid the recent Mark Foley scandal. What assurances do we have that you will stand up to the current wave of corruption that has dominated media headlines? And apparently the Republican response has been they're going to launch an investigation into whether the Democrats knew that the Republican was stepping out and hitting on young interns. But at any rate, where do you stand on the Mark Foley scandal?
And before I say anything else, I apologize to the gentleman in the audience. I'll let the people here keep control of the audience if they are able to. With the Mark Foley investigation, I think that they should follow that wherever it leads to. Do an investigation. Whoever's done wrong, let them be punished under the law. There should be a full investigation, and I approve that and let the chips fall where they will.
Fawcett?
Well, it's interesting because last Friday you were endorsed with a letter from the Speaker of the House, Mr. Hastert, who also supported you for membership in the House Armed Services Committee. I got to tell you, I find this a little confusing from the Republicans because they always yell at Democrats about being the party of immorality and not understanding national defense. Now, you have no military service, sir, yet you're going to be qualified to be on the House Armed Services Committee. Mr. Hastert was in the midst of sending you a letter while one of his own congressmen was resigning over an issue of pedophilia. So I am way over Democrats being accused of being the party of no morality and no understanding of foreign policy and military affairs. As far as supporting this president, there is no greater loyalty than to the Constitution of the United States and the checks and balances that Constitution requires from Congress. That is not disloyal, it is not treasonous. And let's see, somewhere in here, oh yeah, it's called the Constitution, but I'll let you read it for yourself. Most people who've served in the military have, and they understand what they're defending.
Would you like to rebut that, Mr. Lamborn?
Let's go on to the next question.
Okay. Immigration is a huge issue. There are an estimated 12 million illegal immigrants in this country. It's only an estimate because nobody really seems to know. Mr. Lamborn, what would you do? Or actually, we'll start with Mr. Fawcett on this.
Sure.
Mr. Fawcett, what is your plan to address illegal immigration?
Again, I'm on record with this. Border security is the responsibility of the federal government, period. That's all borders, that's all ports of entry. We can start solving that problem by implementing some of the recommendations in the 9/11 Commission report. It's not perfect, but it's a good start. And we're 4 years down the road since those recommendations were made, and they still haven't been implemented. Number two, We're a nation of laws. One of the reasons so many people are attracted to this country and want to come here is that we always aspire to enforce our laws. All immigration laws should be enforced for employers as well as employees, period. Now let's get down to the real issue here, which is who do we want to be as a country about immigration? And we've been having this debate for 200 years. My wife's family is from Boston. They came in through that area. And there was a time in Boston where there were signs on the grass that said, Irish and dogs keep off. So whenever anybody starts talking about them or they, I wonder who that is. So let's talk about that. And I don't have a solution, but I have 3 questions. Number 1, is your solution enforceable? Number 2, does it deal with reality? The reality is we have some number of illegal immigrants here. The other reality is they're human beings. And number 3, what's the cost? Short-term and long-term. Because I'll guarantee you that whatever the solution is, it will have a cost.
Mr. Lamborn?
Oh, I didn't say amnesty anywhere in there, did I? Okay, sorry.
Well, you did, though, tell the Gazette earlier in this campaign
No, sir, I
that
did
you were
not.
in favor of
No, sir, I did
amnesty.
not.
Well, maybe they misreported.
That never happened.
Or
Mr.
maybe you changed your position.
Mr. Lamborn, your opinions and your beliefs and your philosophy on immigration?
We need to secure the borders and keep the problem from getting worse. I approve the House legislation, not the Senate legislation, because the Senate legislation did include amnesty. The House legislation, and they did take steps right before adjourning, they're going to use some money to build some physical barriers, some high-tech detection, and more personnel on the border. We have to secure the border. Then we have to have a system of verifiable ID for people that are working in this country, tamper-proof ID that's verifiable. Right now, you can call in the Social Security number, and they'll just tell you the number is a good number, but they can't tell you it's with that person who is seeking a job. Sometimes up to 10 people use the same valid Social Security number. That system is broken. We have to have a way for the employers to know that that person really is here legally through a verifiable ID process. Then we have to have employer sanctions and large fines so that they won't employ someone who's not here legally. When we do those things, we'll start to get a handle on this problem.
Any more comments on that? Mr.
Yes,
Fawcett?
I think he's absolutely right. The system is broken in terms of verification right now, which begs the issue of a new system. So who's going to pay for that since you're not raising taxes? Is that going to be the small business owners, of which I'm one? And I make a payroll. I understand what it's like to have to enforce these things. So are you going to lay that on the small business owner, or are you going to raise taxes? Oh, wait a minute. You pledged you wouldn't do that. Sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Lamborn, you get rebuttal on this one.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, this segues into the next question, which is you need to come up with verifiable ID. Some people claim that there are people out there in the government who would love to have us each implanted with microchips so they know exactly who we are. That may be a long jump from the Patriot Act, but it seems that in the past few administrations, including the Clinton administration, civil liberties have been chipped away. At what point do you draw the line? What do you favor in terms of the Patriot Act and other intrusions into civil liberties? We'll start with Mr. Lamborn this time.
There are things about the new Patriot Act I have some concerns over, but when it comes to detecting calls made between terrorists, one of them being here in this country and the other being out of the country, I don't have a problem with that because we have to know when terrorists are possibly plotting harm against us and our land. So the detection of terrorist communications, that's something I think is acceptable. And we have to do that in this day and age, unfortunately, with the people, some who are coming here and communicating outside of the country, seeking to do us harm.
Unlike Mr. Lamborn, I've actually been to the National Security Agency, and I've talked to the people that work there, and I've worked with them on projects. They're great folks. They work hard. They also had in place already legislation that allowed them to track terrorist communications, and it used a process of a warrant. And they had leeway in which to implement immediate response while they waited for the warrant. So I'm very concerned about the Patriot Act and how we continue to chip away and being led by people that don't understand what's already available and on the books. NSA didn't ask for those permissions and opportunities. The administration did. So if the NSA experts, who, by the way, let me tell you, if you ever want to see a big collection of geeks, that's the place. If they didn't need it, why did the president?
Okay, we'll shift gears here. What are your ideas regarding water issues in Colorado, and what could you do if elected to Congress to make sure that we have enough water? Mr. Lamborn? Actually, we'll start with Mr. Fawcett. It's your turn.
Ping pong is fair game. Water is the issue that we don't like talking about in this state because it impacts on just about everything else we do. My response initially is be careful if you ask for the federal government in here because you might get what you ask for and you may not like the results. Here's the deal. This state does not have a comprehensive strategic vision for water use, period. So every project that we propose is looked at as an individual project, and it's not looked at how it affects the entire state, how it affects the entire water flow of the district. And when that happens, we immediately run into battle over pre-existing agreements, some of which go back to the 1920s. Now let me do a little quick math for you. If we can't come up with a solution to how we use our water in this state, which means your state representatives and not the federal government, and it goes to the federal government, California has 54 representatives. We have 7. I think you can figure out how those votes are going to go, and we guarantee water flow into the Los Angeles River Basin.
Lamborn.
Right now, the Colorado major river basins are the subject of interstate compacts between Colorado and other states. And the federal government's role is just to rubber stamp interstate compacts. And we have good interstate compacts that have been negotiated, but we have to make sure that we utilize the water that goes out of Colorado, the upper Colorado and the lower Colorado, and by lower Colorado I mean Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Los Angeles, Southern California. They will use the water that we're sending downstream because we don't have a way of storing that. We need to store the water in the wet years that leaves Colorado so that years down the road, and they're already clamoring and going to argue this right now, we let water go down to them, they became dependent on it, and they're going to want it every single year, whether we want it back or not in the future. We have to store our water.
That sounds like a pretty big expenditure of public funds. Where are we going to get the money for that if we don't raise taxes?
Actually, Mr. Fawcett, do you have anything further to add in terms of your strategy for that? And I would allow Mr. Lamborn one more comment on that. If
No, that was my question.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Mr. Lamborn, you have articulated your belief in limited government and maximizing individual liberties. How do you reconcile your belief with less government is best with your pledge to promote social amendments on the federal stage, such as the marriage amendment, a woman's right to choose, etc.?
I don't know which one to start with. When it comes to the right of the unborn, I think that an unborn child, especially those that are close to, that are past the point of viability, should have protection, should have the opportunity to live because they can live on their own. And I know many people don't agree with that, but it's a question of, does that person have rights? I believe that that unborn person does have rights. So if we're talking about the Constitution and we're talking about the role of protecting people's rights, we should not ignore or forget about the unborn's person role in this whole thing. So I think that that is paying respect to the constitutional protection for life itself.
The other element that's in the discussion was civil unions. I think what people are looking for there are not they've thrown in donkeys and all kinds of other things into the mix, but what people are really looking for is the legal right to visit a loved one in the hospital whom they might not be blood related to. What is your stance on civil unions?
I don't intend to vote at the state level for referendum I. I will not vote for that. I will vote to protect marriage as between one man and one woman in the state constitution. Western civilization has fared very well under the concept that one man and one woman is what constitutes marriage.
Mr. Fawcett?
Well, a couple of interesting things in these observations. If the issue is viability, then the protections are already in place, both in Roe v. Wade and in southeastern Pennsylvania fertility clinic versus Casey. Both of those civil Supreme Court findings provide for protection for viability. So I'm a little confused there. But I am in favor of a woman's right to choose. Abortion should be rare, safe, and legal. We've tried making it illegal before, and it didn't work. Now, let's get on to the issue here of the civil unions. My opponent here said earlier that I was in favor of gay marriage. No, I'm voting for the amendment to the Constitution in favor of marriage between a man and a woman. But I'm also voting for civil unions. And here's why. This country is inclusive in nature. Every time we get exclusive, we run into trouble. And as far as the history of marriage in the Western civilization, there was a time in this country when the laws read, marriage is between a man and a woman of the same race. So we do change our perceptions of many social institutions as we grow as a nation and we expand our thinking. This is not going to threaten you or anybody else. A civil union will provide for fairness across the board. That's all. No more, no less. And like I said, I'm going to vote for the marriage amendment.
We'll make this our last question, and then we'll go to our closing comments. Some people favor a transportation future of unlimited lanes of blacktop. Others see alternatives such as light rail. Where do you fall on this? And we'll start with Mr. Fawcett.
What this comes down to is essentially an energy policy in this country. We're addicted to low-cost energy. The President got pretty close to that in his last State of the Union address. We get it from oil. I like the way I live. I like living in this country. I've lived in a lot of different countries on this planet, and this is the best one, bar none. But we don't have to get that energy from oil. By doing that, it covers everything that we do with foreign policy. It affects our economic policies. It sends our young men and women in harm's way to secure sources of oil with people who don't like us and we don't like them. My view is that what we can do from the federal government perspective is invest in the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, put in place a method for flipping that technology and taking advantage for what we do best. We are a nation of entrepreneurs. We can kickstart an energy portfolio, and that's what we should be doing. Because I lived through the 73 oil embargo. We were going to do all kinds of things. We were looking for the silver bullet that was going to replace oil. And then the price of oil came down. And all of a sudden, everything was okay again. Well, here we are. It's 30 years later, and we're talking about figuring out what we're going to do about oil again, and the price is going to go down. And my worry is, once again, we're not going to worry. Like I said, I've stood in the western desert of Iraq with a rifle and a rucksack. Not a pleasant place.
Mr. Lamborn?
We should look at renewables. We should look at research of alternative types of energy sources. We should allow the free market to work. My opponent just said that we're a nation of entrepreneurs. Yes, and we have a free market. And our free market system can work very well. If the price of one type of energy goes up, people are going to automatically look to another source for that energy. And those who are supplying something that's scarce, and if they can make money, the free market says they're going to go out and look for more of it. If they find more of it, the price of that will go down. The free market will work. The government can sure get in the way of having energy exploitation and energy use, energy development. We have domestic sources of energy that are available and we should use. For instance, I support opening up ANWR. If we had done that 10 years ago, the Congress passed it, President Clinton vetoed it, we'd have 1 million barrels of oil a day coming into our country.
Still doesn't replace the imports.
Excuse me.
Still doesn't, Doug.
Excuse me. May I finish?
Okay, let him finish his comment, please.
Okay.
So if we had that 1 million barrels of oil coming into our country a day, that would help. We have the outer continental shelf. Right now we have a prohibition on energy being drilled for oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico and the outer continental shelf. During Hurricane Katrina, a Category 5 hurricane going through the Gulf, how many drops of oil spilled? Not a single drop, not a single barrel. Gas can't spill. But yet there's a prohibition. Now Congress is barely opening the door a little bit. But that's the kind of thing that we could open up. We have a lot of domestic energy. If we exploited that, we wouldn't have to rely so much on energy from Iraq or the Middle East or foreign sources.
Allow one more quick rebuttal and re-rebuttal. Mr. Fawcett?
Well, once again, I'm a little confused at my opponent's understanding of economics. The free market's working us right back into Central Southwest Asia because that's where the oil is. As far as opening up the other energy sources within this country that are non-renewables, the important word there is non-renewable. Now, okay, so you push the problem to our grandchildren. Good job. Because we're not going to replace the oil that we import, and we're not going to deal with, no, it's not bullshit, it's truth. We're not going to replace our imported oil with domestic resources and products. And, by the way, China and India are coming right behind us, bidding for the same resources. So we deal with it now, or our grandkids deal with it. Choose one.
Mr. Lamborn?
That's okay.
Okay, let's do our closing comments here. Mr. Lamborn, you begin this one.
Thank you. This has been a stimulating discussion. Folks, what I would like to do, if you elect me as your congressman, is to carry on what I've been doing for 12 years in the Colorado House and Senate. I've stood for smaller government and lower taxes. That's more freedom for you. That's more money in your pocket. I won't support any tax increase in Congress. I will stand for traditional values. I will stand for a strong military. I will support our veterans and our active duty personnel. I've been doing that in the legislature, and I'll continue to do that if you elect me as your congressman. I value your vote, and I ask for your vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Mr. Fawcett?
The good part of an election like this is I don't think you can confuse Doug and I. I think we're pretty distinct between one another and our views. And that's good because it gives you a clear choice. And the choice is, I wish to represent you in Congress to fulfill the roles and obligations of the Constitution. Checks and balances. Furthering what the people's work is. We're in a logjam in Congress right now because both sides of the aisle have managed to create impediments over dogma, screaming at one another on CNN for 15 more minutes of coverage. That's not furthering your business. That's not even debate. When I sat down with Congressman Heffley after the primary and asked him for his views on Washington, I came away with a couple of things. One, I will carry on his legacy of ethical behavior and high standards in the Congress. I lived by my cadet code for 20 years, and I continue to live by it. I have no problem with that. Number two, he was disappointed how over the course of his tenure in Congress, the ability to have reasoned discourse had disappeared. And he blamed both sides of the aisle, I think fairly. We have to get back to doing the people's work. Now, promises, guarantees, I'll make you one. You may not always agree with me. In fact, I suspect there's a few folks here that don't already. But the role of a congressman is to represent everyone in the district. I've been out to focus on the family. I've been to church with Ted Haggard. I've also been to Pride Fest, and my wife and I are members of the Black Chamber of Commerce as well as the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. You represent everyone. You listen to all your constituents. I promise you I will listen. I promise you I will make a decision, and I promise you I'll tell you how I arrived at that decision. You may not always like it. That's why we interview for this job every 2 years. And I hope I pass the interview. Thank you very much.